Okay, let's really unpack this. We've got quite a pile of material here. Articles, interviews, personal stories, and they paint this picture that honestly sounds almost too incredible to be true.
Hmm.
It's about these two men, right, on totally opposite sides in World War II, one of the, well, most brutal wars ever, and somehow their lives get tangled up in a way you just couldn't predict.
Absolutely. We're doing a deep dive today into Jacob DeShazer. He was an American airman, one of the Doolittle Raiders who became a prisoner of war in Japan, and Mitsuo Fuchida.
Fuchida, the Japanese pilot who actually led the air attack on Pearl Harbor.
That's the one.
So using all the source material, our goal, our mission here is, yeah, trace their paths through the war, sure, but really zoom in on these amazing, surprising journeys of faith they both took.
How did they go from being, bitter enemies trying to kill each other to becoming close friends, even partners sharing the same message?
Exactly. We want to pull out those key moments, the twists, the turns, and maybe what we can learn from these, well, incredible stories.
It's a story that definitely makes you ask, can that kind of deep, deep hatred ever really be overcome?
It really does. So where do we start? Let's look at who they were before all this happened, before history kind of threw them together.
Okay, so on one side, you've got Jacob DeShazer. He grew up in Staten, Oregon. His parents were Christians, but the accounts suggest he was pretty skeptical about faith himself early on.
Just a regular young guy then. Graduated high school, joined the Army Air Corps.
Pretty much. And then there's Mitsuo Fuchida, totally different background. His father's a very strong nationalist, really patriotic.
Okay.
Fuchida went to the Naval Academy when he was just 18, a big deal, joined the Japanese Naval Air Force. And he was good, really good. Logged something like over 10,000 flight hours.
Wow.
Yeah, he really admired guys like Admiral Togo, these Japanese military heroes, dreamed of being like them.
So two very different young men. And then, boom, World War II hits.
Exactly. And their paths collide violently. DeShazer, he volunteers for this top-secret, incredibly dangerous mission. We now know it as the Doolittle Raid.
Right. America's answer to Pearl Harbor. A way to hit back.
And while DeShazer's training for that, Fushida's already a big name. He gets picked to command the entire air attack force for Pearl Harbor.
The leader of the whole thing.
Yes. And the details we have from that morning, December 7th, 1941, they're pretty chilling. Fuchida's up at 3 a.m. He leads 360 planes off the carriers, about 230 miles north of Oahu, flying towards Hawaii in the dark.
And he gets there, sees the U.S. fleet just sitting there, unsuspecting, a moment frozen in time, really. Then at 7:49 a.m., he gives the order.
All squadrons, plunge into attack. That was the command.
And then the famous code words.
Tora, Tora, Tora. Tiger, tiger, tiger. Meaning they'd achieve complete surprise. He was personally commanding the high-level bombers.
The impact was just immediate, devastating. The accounts list, the ships hit 8 battleships attacked, some repaired later, yeah, but it basically crippled the U.S. Pacific Fleet right then and there.
And the human cost. Just awful. Over 3,000 U.S. Navy guys killed or missing, nearly 900 wounded. Army casualties, too.
And Fuchida, watching this unfold.
He described feeling almost ablaze with joy. He saw it as, the absolute high point of his military life. Huge success for Japan at that moment.
Meanwhile, back in the U.S., they're planning that payback raid, the Doolittle Raid. A few months later, April 42, and DeShazer's on it.
Yep. He's the bombardier on the very last plane, #16, a B-25 bomber, taking off from the USS Hornet carrier deck, which was itself incredibly risky, launching those heavy planes from a carrier.
Super risky. His turret.
Oil tanks in Nagoya. That's about 300 miles south of Tokyo. He dropped his bombs, incendiaries about 2,000 pounds worth, scored a direct hit. Apparently, even while they were taking enemy fire, windshield got damaged.
Mission accomplished, but then they had to get out, fly towards China, right? A long flight, almost 14 hours.
Right, but DeShazer's plane didn't make it. Ran out of fuel over China, but it was Japanese-occupied territory. They had to bail out, parachute down.
And DeShazer's landing wasn't smooth.
No. He called it an awful jolt. Landed on a grave, actually. Broke some ribs.
Landed on a grave, and then
Captured the next day. 10 Japanese soldiers found him. And that was the start of, a long, terrible ordeal for him as a prisoner of war.
And Fuchida, after Pearl Harbor.
He kept flying, saw more action. Though, interestingly, he got appendicitis right before the Battle of Midway. Had to sit it out. And Midway was Japan's first really big naval defeat.
So fate intervened there a bit, and when the war finally ended, Fuchida was obviously on the losing side.
Yeah, a defeated warrior. The sources say he didn't want to surrender initially, but, the emperor decided, so he accepted it, went back to farming, trying to support his family in occupied Japan.
So you've got these two men in completely different places after the war. Fuchida, the celebrated commander, now defeated. DeShazer, the young airman who'd just survived. Well, hell, really.
And that suffering DeShazer went through, it's absolutely key to his story. 40 months as a POW. And get this, 34 of those months were in solitary confinement.
34 months? Alone? The accounts of the treatment? They're brutal.
Oh yeah, they don't hold back. Cruel treatment, torture, starvation, rations. Dysentery so bad he was delirious sometimes.
And the hate. He talked about the hate he felt.
Intense, violent hatred for his Japanese guards. The ones doing this to him. He said it almost drove him completely insane.
And we should probably add, his experience, while horrific, wasn't unique, was it? The treatment of Allied POWs by the Japanese.
No, it was notoriously bad. Often completely ignored things like the Geneva Convention, the rules for treating prisoners humanely. Malnutrition was standard. Diseases like beriberi, pellagra, horrible deficiency diseases from the awful diet were common.
Forced labor, too, right? Brutal conditions.
Absolutely. Mines, factories carrying heavy loads. And those hell ships you read about. Transporting prisoners crammed together in ships' holds, suffocating heat, no sanitation, disease spreading like wildfire. Shockingly high death rates.
The stats are grim. Only about half, a little over half, of Allied POWs held by Japan survived the war.
So when DeShazer talks about hatred, you understand where it came from. It wasn't abstract, it was his daily reality.
But then something shifts after 2 years of this. 2 years in solitary, hating his captors.
Yeah, he described it as a light began to dawn. He remembered talking to another prisoner, Lieutenant Bob Meter. Meter had reminded him about God, about Jesus.
And Meter didn't make it, did he?
No. Tragically, he died of starvation later. But that conversation, it stayed with DeShazer. He started thinking, why? Why do people hate each other so much?
And he got this urge.
A strange longing, he called it, to read the Bible. He had heard this idea, maybe from Meter, that Christianity could actually change hatred into love. He wanted to see if it was true.
Meanwhile, Fuchida, back in Japan, he's dealing with his own stuff.
Totally. The war hero is now just a farmer. In a defeated, occupied country. He gets called to testify at war crimes trials, and the accounts say he was filled with his own bitterness, his own desire for revenge. He felt the Japanese people were being mistreated by the occupiers.
So two men, different sides of the war, different experiences, but both kind of stuck in this place of resentment and bitterness.
Exactly. And this is where both their stories take this just unbelievable, unexpected turn toward faith.
Okay, so DeShazer's in prison wanting to read a Bible. How does that even happen?
Well, this is one of those incredible details. The Japanese guards actually gave the American prisoners Bibles. Maybe as some kind of token gesture, who knows? But they got them.
Wow.
DeShazer was enlisted, so he had to wait for the officers to read it first. You can only imagine him waiting, hoping this book held some kind of answer.
Must have been agony, waiting.
When he finally got it, he had it for 3 weeks. And he said he just devoured it, read it for hours every day, realized it wasn't just some old historical book. It felt alive to him.
What specifically hit him?
He talked about marveling at the redemption he found there. But the part that really struck him, given where he was and what he was feeling, were the parts about forgiving your enemies, loving your enemies.
In that situation, surrounded by the people he hated, that must have seemed impossible.
Completely counterintuitive, you'd think. Yeah. But it resonated. And then came this specific moment, June 8th, 1944. He's reading in his cell, and he reads Romans 10, verse 9.
Which says,
"If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved."
And right then.
Right then. He said he prayed, asked God to take over his life, and his heart was just filled with joy. He felt this incredible peace, said he wouldn't trade places with anyone, not even the emperor.
Wow. Just like that, a complete turnaround.
It seems so. And it was real, so real that he had to share. His co-pilot, Bob Haidt, tells this amazing story about how they communicated between solitary cells through the toilet plumbing.
Yeah.
DeShazer used this makeshift communication line to tell Haidt about his conversion, about the peace he'd found.
That's incredible. Plumbing prayers, and there was another instance, right? Something almost prophetic.
Yeah, he recounts this too. August 10th, 1945. DeShazer had been praying for hours, 7 hours straight. Afterwards, he tells Haidt, "The Lord revealed to me that the war will end today. We will not be shot. We will be released."
August 10th, 1945. That's the day after the Nagasaki bomb.
Exactly. The day Japan's leadership effectively decided to surrender. An absolutely stunning moment for DeShazer and Haidt.
It must have cemented his faith completely and gave him a sense of purpose.
Definitely. He felt God had saved him for a reason. And that reason, he believed, was to go back to Japan. Not for revenge, but to preach the gospel, to share the message of forgiveness he'd found.
Okay, now let's switch back to Fuchida. Post-war Japan, he's bitter, farming. How does his turn happen?
It also starts with an unexpected encounter. He bumps into an old friend, a former flight engineer who had actually been a POW captured by the Americans.
Ah, the other side of the coin.
Right. And Fuchida probably expected to hear horror stories. But his friend said no, he wasn't mistreated. And he told Fuchida this incredible story about a young American woman, a missionary. Her parents had been killed by Japanese soldiers earlier in the war, killed by his side.
Okay.
But this woman had come back to the POW camp where this friend was held, and she ministered to the Japanese prisoners, treated them with kindness, respect, genuine love.
After her parents were killed by them?
Exactly. Fuchida was stunned. How could someone show that kind of forgiveness to the people responsible for such a personal tragedy? It completely challenged his ideas about the enemy, about revenge.
Planted a seed, you could say.
Definitely planted a seed.
Yeah.
Then, not long after, in 1950, he's getting off a train in Tokyo, just a normal day, and someone hands him a pamphlet.
Don't tell me.
Yep. The pamphlet was titled, "I Was a Prisoner of Japan," and it was written by Jacob DeShazer.
No way. The Doolittle Raider who bombed Japan and was in prison?
The very same. Fuchida started reading it, and he was drawn to the peaceful motivation DeShazer wrote about. This sense of peace was exactly what Fuchida felt he was missing, what he was searching for in his own life after the war.
So if this American found peace in the Bible...
Fuchida figured he should read it too. Even though he came from a Buddhist background, he went out and bought a Bible, started reading it really eagerly.
And like DeShazer, was there a specific part that hit him?
Yes. He got to the crucifixion story, and he read the words of Jesus on the cross from Luke's Gospel. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Forgive them.
That verse struck him like lightning. He said he suddenly realized he was one of them. He was one of the people Jesus was praying for. He had killed people, ordered attacks, all in the name of patriotism, without really understanding this deeper kind of love, this forgiveness.
And that was his moment.
That was it. Right at that moment, he said, he felt like he met Jesus personally. He understood Jesus' death wasn't just a historical event, but something done for him, a substitute for his own wickedness, as he put it.
So he prayed.
He prayed. Asked Jesus to forgive him, to change him, to make him a well-balanced Christian with purpose in living. He marked that date, April 14th, 1950, as the second day to remember in his life. Pearl Harbor was the first, his conversion the second. He said he became a new person. His whole view on life just completely changed.
Incredible. Two enemies finding the same faith through completely different yet connected paths. How did people react to Fuchida's conversion, a national hero turning to the enemy's religion?
Yeah, it caused a huge stir. Headlines like "Pearl Harbor Hero Converts to Christianity."
Yeah.
Friends, family were shocked. Some old war buddies tried to talk him out of it. Some accused him of being an opportunist, maybe trying to curry favor with the American occupiers.
But he stuck with it.
He absolutely did. His life proved it wasn't just a phase. It was a genuine transformation.
So both men, forged in war, find this faith. What happens next? DeShazer first. He gets out of prison.
Right. Liberated just 10 days after that prayer about the war ending. Comes back to the U.S. He's a hero. Naturally, his story is everywhere. But he's already got this mission in mind. Back to Japan.
Back to Japan.
Yeah.
To preach the gospel. And apparently, not everyone thought it was a great idea. Some people were critical, even parents of other Doolittle airmen who had been executed by the Japanese. They couldn't understand why he'd want to go back.
Understandable bitterness, for sure. But he was determined.
Absolutely unwavering. And he knew he needed training. So just 2 months after being freed, still recovering, probably he enrolls at Seattle Pacific College. Said it felt like coming into a good, strong house, a place to heal and prepare.
And he met his wife there.
Yes, Florence Matheny. She was also a student there, also felt a call to be a missionary. Perfect match. They got married about a year after his release, started a family. They eventually had 5 kids.
And then they actually went.
They did. 6 years after he dropped bombs on Nagoya, Jacob and Florence DeShazer sailed to Japan, December 1948, as Free Methodist missionaries.
Just imagine stepping onto that dock.
Right, and apparently people were waiting. Crowds turned out. They were curious. This American bomber, this former POW who now said he loved them. They wanted to see him. And his pamphlet had paved the way.
1 million copies of "I Was a Prisoner of Japan" had been distributed before they even arrived. So people knew his story, knew about his conversion in prison.
What was their ministry like?
Intense, especially at first. He preached constantly, like 4 or 5 times a day for the first 6 years. He studied Japanese at college so he could communicate. And people started calling him sensei teacher. Think about that contrast, from POW number Daigogo to sensei.
That's powerful. Did it work? Did people respond?
The accounts say yes, absolutely.
Mm.
His love for the Japanese people was seen as deep and genuine, flowing from his faith. And it was mutual. Thousands of Japanese became Christians through their work.
Including some significant people.
This is amazing. 2 of his former prison guards, the men who had guarded him, likely part of the system that mistreated him, Mr. Oda and Mr. Misawa. They heard him preach, saw his forgiveness, and became Christians themselves.
That's just mind-blowing forgiveness in action.
Isn't it? And over the years, he and Florence helped plant 23 churches, including one in Nagoya, the city he bombed.
Full circle.
Completely. They raised their family there, saw hardships, saw God provide, like when their son Paul recovered from a serious illness. DeShazer eventually became a superintendent in the church. Their legacy is huge. Many Japanese Christians today can trace their faith back to the DeShazer's ministry.
Okay, so what about Fuchida? After his conversion, what did he do?
He also became an evangelist, a very passionate one. He traveled all over Japan, other parts of Asia, even came to the U.S., sharing his story, introducing people to the Christ he'd once hated.
What was his message?
He strongly believed that Jesus was the only real hope, especially for young people. That true peace, true freedom, only comes through knowing Christ. He dedicated himself, he said, to striking a death blow to the basic hatred which infests the human heart, using Christ's love as the weapon.
He wrote books too, right?
Yes, including his autobiography, famously titled From Pearl Harbor to Calvary. What a title.
Incredible. And then they met, DeShazer and Fuchida.
Yes. It happened in 1950, not long after Fuchida read DeShazer's tract and had his own conversion experience. The former enemies finally came face to face.
What must that have been like?
We can only imagine. But they didn't just meet and shake hands, they became close friends. Actual friends.
Friends. The man who led Pearl Harbor and the Doolittle Raider who was his prisoner?
Yes, and they did more than just become friends. They started leading evangelistic meetings together, across Japan, standing side by side.
Picture that, on a stage together, sharing a message of forgiveness.
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? The ultimate picture of reconciliation. Talk about overcoming division.
Their legacy is just immense. DeShazer kept speaking even after retiring. Their families carried on the connection. DeShazer's kids went to SBU too. It really is one of the most powerful stories to come out of the war.
It highlights so much, doesn't it? First, just the possibility of transformation. No matter how deep the hatred, how terrible the past actions or suffering, faith in Christ could bring about this radical change.
And it wasn't abstract. It was tied directly to their personal stories, their testimonies, and reading the Bible. Those were the catalysts.
Exactly. And then there's the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. Not just as an idea, but lived out. It wasn't easy for them, you can be sure. There was criticism, doubt, but they committed their lives to it.
And that commitment had this ripple effect, impacting thousands of lives, building bridges where there were only walls.
It really shows that hope can come from the darkest, most violent conflicts. Redemption is possible.
So as we wrap up, here's something maybe for you, the listener, to think about. When you consider just how deep the hatred ran between these men, I mean, literally trying to kill each other, enduring terrible suffering because of the war, what does their story, their radical turn towards forgiveness and friendship, suggest about the possibility of overcoming the divisions and hatred we see in our own world today?
Yeah, and maybe even more personally, where could someone possibly find the kind of power that could bring about such a profound change? That could turn an enemy into a brother. Their story offers a pretty compelling answer.